Good day students. I'm Lloyd, your AI narrator of the subject Air Transportation and Management Perspective AMT 115 and ABM 101. This is a short video that covers the prelim topic, so please take note of some important details or have a copy because after the short slides, there are questions to answer serve as your attendance. This course contains the history of air transportation, organization of the air transportation industry, review of the air transportation situation, past, present, and future airports and airways system in the Philippines. The Philippines Air Transport Policy, Open Sky Policy, national and international regulatory agencies. For proper management of the air transportation industry. There is a story sparks the human curiosity and started the human aviation. Check this video of the Greek legend Icarus and Daedalus.
In mythological ancient Greece, soaring above Crete on wings made from wax and feathers, Icarus, the son of Daedalus, defied the laws of both man and nature. Ignoring the warnings of his father, he rose higher and higher. To witnesses on the ground, he looked like a god, and as he peered down from above, he felt like one too. But in mythological ancient Greece, the line that separated God from man was absolute, and the punishment for mortals who attempted to cross it was severe. Such was the case for Icarus and Daedalus. Years before Icarus was born, his father Daedalus was highly regarded as a genius inventor, craftsman, and sculptor in his homeland of Athens. He invented carpentry and all the tools used for it. He designed the first bathhouse and the first dance floor. He made sculptures so lifelike that Hercules mistook them for actual men. Though skilled and celebrated, Daedalus was egotistical and jealous. Worried that his nephew was a more skillful craftsman, Daedalus murdered him. As punishment, Daedalus was banished from Athens and made his way to Crete. Preceded by his storied reputation, Daedalus was welcomed with open arms by Crete's king Minos. There, acting as the palace technical advisor, Daedalus continued to push the boundaries. For the king's children, he made mechanically animated toys that seemed alive. He invented the ship's sail and mast, which gave humans control over the wind. With every creation, Daedalus challenged human limitations that had so far kept mortals separate from gods, until finally, he broke right through. King Minos' wife, Pasiphae, had been cursed by the god Poseidon to fall in love with the king's prized bull. Under this spell, she asked Daedalus to help her seduce it. With characteristic audacity, he agreed. Daedalus constructed a hollow wooden cow, so realistic that it fooled the bull. With Pasiphae hiding inside Daedalus' creation, she conceived and gave birth to the half-human, half-bull Minotaur. This, of course, enraged the king, who blamed Daedalus for enabling such a horrible perversion of natural law. As punishment, Daedalus was forced to construct an inescapable labyrinth beneath the palace for the Minotaur. When it was finished, Minos then imprisoned Daedalus and his only son Icarus within the top of the tallest tower on the island, where they were to remain for the rest of their lives. But Daedalus was still a genius inventor. While observing the birds that circled his prison, the means for escape became clear. He and Icarus would fly away from their prison as only birds or gods could do. Using feathers from the flocks that perched on the tower, and the wax from candles, Daedalus constructed 2 pairs of giant wings. As he strapped the wings to his son Icarus, he gave a warning. Flying too near the ocean would dampen the wings and make them too heavy to use. Flying too near the sun, the heat would melt the wax, and the wings would disintegrate. In either case, they surely would die. Therefore, the key to their escape would be in keeping to the middle. With the instructions clear, both men leapt from the tower. They were the first mortals ever to fly. While Daedalus stayed carefully to the midway course, Icarus was overwhelmed with the ecstasy of flight and overcome with the feeling of divine power that came with it. Daedalus could only watch in horror as Icarus ascended higher and higher, powerless to change his son's dire fate. When the heat from the sun melted the wax on his wings, Icarus fell from the sky. Just as Daedalus had many times ignored the consequences of defying the natural laws of mortal men in the service of his ego, Icarus was also carried away by his own hubris. In the end, both men paid for their departure from the path of moderation dearly. Icarus with his life, and Daedalus with his regret.
In Malmesbury Abbey, England, year 1010. An English monk had read the Greek fable of Daedalus, and it was his belief in the fable that influenced him to make the attempt. He successfully traveled a distance of 200 meters but crashed to the ground, breaking both legs and crippled for the rest of his life. His name is Eilmer or Elmer. He is the first pioneer of flight attempted to fly using homemade wings. Since antiquity, there have been stories of men strapping bird-like wings, stiffened cloaks or other devices to themselves and attempting to fly, typically by jumping off a tower. During this early period, the issues of lift, stability, and control were not understood, and most attempts ended in serious injury or death. Leonardo da Vinci, father of paleontology. The first person who think logically about human flight. He made a number of sketches of flying machines, including a glider, helicopter, and parachute. Leonardo da Vinci's 15th-century dream of flight found expression in several rational but unscientific designs, though he did not attempt to construct any of them. Montgolfier brothers. In Annonay, France, year 1783. A French aviator also called Montgolfier brothers, who were the pioneer developers of hot air balloon and who conducted the first untethered flights. The discovery of hydrogen gas in the 18th century led to the invention of the hydrogen balloon, at almost exactly the same time that the Montgolfier brothers rediscovered the hot air balloon and began manned flights. Robert brothers. Les Frères Robert. Jean Robert and Nicholas Louis Robert were the engineers who built the world's first hydrogen balloon for Professor Jacques Charles, which flew from central Paris on August 27, 1783. They went on to build the world's first manned hydrogen balloon, and on December 1, 1783, Nicholas Louis accompanied Jacques Charles on a 2-hour, 5-minute flight. Their barometer and thermometer made it the first balloon flight to provide meteorological measurements of the atmosphere above the Earth's surface. The brothers subsequently experimented with an elongated elliptical shape for the hydrogen envelope in a balloon they attempted to power and steer by means of oars and umbrellas. In September 1784, the brothers flew 186 kilometers from Paris to Beuvry, the world's first flight of more than 100 kilometers. Year 1783 was a watershed year for ballooning and aviation. Between June 4 and December 1, 5 aviation firsts were achieved in France. On June 4, the Montgolfier brothers demonstrated their unmanned hot air balloon at Annonay, France. On August 27, Jacques Charles and the Robert brothers, Les Frères Robert, launched the world's first unmanned hydrogen-filled balloon, from the Champ de Mars, Paris. On October 19, the Montgolfiers launched the first manned flight, a tethered balloon with humans on board, at the Folie Titan in Paris. The aviators were the scientist Jean-François Pilatre de Roger, the manufacture manager Jean-Baptiste Revillon, and Giraud de Villette. On November 21, the Montgolfiers launched the first free flight with human passengers. King Louis XVI had originally decreed that condemned criminals would be the first pilots, but Jean-François Pilatre de Roger, along with the Marquis François d'Arlandes, successfully petitioned for the honor. They drifted 8 kilometers in a balloon powered by a wood fire. On December 1, Jacques Charles and the Nicolas Louis Robert launched their manned hydrogen balloon from the Jardin des Tuileries in Paris, as a crowd of 400,000 witnessed. They ascended to a height of about 1,800 feet and landed at sunset in Nesles-la-Vallée after a flight of 2 hours and 5 minutes, covering 36 kilometers. After Robert alighted, Charles decided to ascend alone. This time he ascended rapidly to an altitude of about 9,800 feet where he saw the sun again, suffered extreme pain in his ears, and never flew again. There are two problems of balloon aircraft. It's impossible to change direction. And they easily caught on fire. Check this video of the Hindenburg disaster that brought an end to the age of rigid airship.
The ill-fated Hindenburg on her last flight sails over New York. These pictures, made from a Pathé News plane less than 4 hours before the tragedy, show the world's largest airship heading for Lakehurst, New Jersey. Over Newark's famous auto skyway, the airship was hailed by thousands who little dreamed it was their final glimpse of the Hindenburg. Inside the silver envelope are 16 separate gas bags, each filled with hydrogen, a highly inflammable gas. From the ground, you can see the forward control cabin from which the ship is operated. The windows along the side indicate the location of the passengers' quarters, in which many were carried to a flaming death. Approaching Lakehurst, the Hindenburg appeared a conquering giant of the skies, but she proved a puny plaything in the mighty grip of fate. It almost seemed as if fate had set the stage for the horrible tragedy. A graceful craft sailing serenely to her doom. For 3 hours, the dirigible circled the landing field at Lakehurst, New Jersey, dumping more water ballast than ever before in vain efforts to level off. Again she dumps ballast, and a nervous tension grips those who are watching, for this is something unusual. There goes more ballast, but the tail is settling in spite of all that has been dumped. A grim note of impending tragedy. Finally, the landing lines are dropped. These scenes were filmed by Pathé News cameraman William Deek, and you are about to see the pictures he got when the ship exploded. Those aboard leaping for life from a flaming inferno, the actual crash of the Hindenburg, an airship destroyed in less than half a minute. Rushing to the rescue, the heroes of the tragedy dash in, heedless of danger, to help the injured to safety, while others, beyond help, perish in the flames. The blazing aftermath reveals the extent of the disaster, an inferno which became a flaming tomb, a twisted mass of girders, the seared and scorched skeleton of what was once a mighty airship. The Hindenburg has gone. She represented man's latest attempt to conquer the Atlantic by air. Her tragedy will not halt the march of progress. From her ashes will arise the knowledge, from her fate the lesson that will lead to a greater and a better means of mastering the air. If so, her dead will not have died in vain.
Sir George Cayley, father of aviation. He is an English engineer, inventor, and aviator. He is one of the most important people in the history of aeronautics. Many consider him to be the first true scientific aerial investigator and the first person to understand the underlying principles and design first successful human glider. Discovered the four aerodynamic forces of flight: weight, lift, drag, thrust, and cambered wings, basis for the design of the modern aeroplane. Samuel Langley, an American astronomer, physicist, inventor of the bolometer and aviation pioneer. Invented an unmanned aircraft using lightweight steam engine and achieved a flight of 1 kilometer. Langley began his experiments on the physics of flight while still at the Allegheny Observatory. The results of those tests were published in Experiments in Aerodynamics and provided a foundation for the design of a series of flying models, beginning with smaller rubber-powered aircraft and culminating in larger tandem-wing aerodromes, as he called them, powered by lightweight steam engines. On May 6, 1896, one of these aircraft, the Langley Aerodrome No. 5, made a flight of some 3,000 feet over the Potomac River. It was the first time that a powered, heavier-than-air machine had achieved sustained flight. The Wright brothers. Wilbur and Orville Wright were American inventors and pioneers of aviation. In 1903 the Wright brothers achieved the first powered, sustained, and controlled airplane flight. They surpassed their own milestone 2 years later when they built and flew the first fully practical airplane. They always working on different mechanical projects and keeping up with scientific research, the Wright brothers closely followed the research of German aviator Otto Lilienthal. When Lilienthal died in a glider crash, the brothers decided to start their own experiments with flight. Determined to develop their own successful design, Wilbur and Orville headed to Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, known for its strong winds. Wilbur and Orville set to work trying to figure out how to design wings for flight. They observed that birds angled their wings for balance and control, and tried to emulate this, developing a concept called wing warping. When they added a movable rudder, the Wright brothers found they had the magic formula. On December 17, 1903, they succeeded in flying the first free, controlled flight of a power-driven, heavier-than-air plane. Wilbur flew their plane for 59 seconds, at 852 feet, an extraordinary achievement. Check this video for more information about the history of the Wright brothers.
On December 17, 1903, in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, Orville and Wilbur Wright made 4 brief flights in their first powered aircraft, which they called the Flyer. Thanks to that achievement, they soared into history as the inventors of the first successful airplane, earning the honor of being first in flight. But do they truly deserve this title? The answer is a bit more complicated than you might think. In fact, a number of inventors in the United States and Europe had launched crafts into flight before the Wrights in 1903. If others flew before them, why do the Wright brothers get all the credit for inventing the airplane? The answer depends on how you define the word airplane. To truly be an airplane, experts say, a flying craft must be heavier than air and it must be manned and powered. It must also be able to take off and land under its own power. Finally, an airplane must be controllable along all three axes, known to pilots as roll, pitch, and yaw, in order to avoid crashing. This last feature marks the key contribution of the Wright brothers. Through their innovative wing warping design, they gave pilots three-axis controls, helping avoid the crashes that were so common among early aircrafts. Another reason for the Wrights' unique place in history is that, unlike some other early inventors, they continued to work on and improve their designs. Some say Gustav Whitehead may have beaten the Wrights to the punch by making a powered flight in 1901 in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Whether this claim is true is still being debated, but what seems clear is that none of the flying machines Whitehead built after that date ever got off the ground. By contrast, the Wrights had continued success with their designs, and by 1908 they had developed a practical craft that would carry two people on longer flights. Through public demonstrations and teaching their skills to would-be flyers, the brothers enabled aviation to spread around the world. Even today, more than a century later, planes and pilots continue to use the same basic skills and control system developed by the famous brothers. So even though the Wright brothers weren't the first to leave the ground, they do deserve credit for making a controlled, sustained-powered flight in a craft that can rightfully be considered the world's first successful airplane.
An aircraft in flight maneuvers in 3 dimensions. To control this movement, the pilot manipulates the flight controls to cause the aircraft to rotate about one or more of its 3 axes of rotation. These 3 axes, referred to as longitudinal, lateral, and vertical, are each perpendicular to the others and intersect at the aircraft's center of gravity. Motion around the longitudinal axis, the lateral axis and the vertical axis are referred to as roll, pitch, and yaw respectively. The primary flight control surface for controlling roll is the ailerons, for pitch the elevator, and for yaw, the rudder. Rotation around one axis may induce an uncommanded rotation around a second axis. In this case, simultaneous use of the associated flight control surfaces is required to maintain coordinated flight. Vertical axis. The yaw axis has its origin at the center of gravity and is directed towards the bottom of the aircraft, perpendicular to the wings and to the fuselage reference line. Motion about this axis is called yaw. A positive yawing motion moves the nose of the aircraft to the right. The rudder is the primary control of yaw. The term yaw was originally applied in sailing, and referred to the motion of an unsteady ship rotating about its vertical axis. Its etymology is uncertain. Lateral axis. The pitch axis, also called transverse or lateral axis, has its origin at the center of gravity and is directed to the right, parallel to a line drawn from wingtip to wingtip. Motion about this axis is called pitch. A positive pitching motion raises the nose of the aircraft and lowers the tail. The elevators are the primary control of pitch. Longitudinal axis. The roll axis, or longitudinal axis, has its origin at the center of gravity and is directed forward, parallel to the fuselage reference line. Motion about this axis is called roll. An angular displacement about this axis is called bank. A positive rolling motion lifts the left wing and lowers the right wing. The pilot rolls by increasing the lift on one wing and decreasing it on the other. This changes the bank angle. The ailerons are the primary control of bank. The rudder also has a secondary effect on bank. There are 2 types of aircraft. Lighter than air aircraft or aerostat gains its lift through the use of a buoyant gas. It includes unpowered balloons and powered airships. A balloon may be free-flying or tethered. Heavier than air aircraft or aerodyne, deriving its lift mainly from aerodynamic forces, such as glider, helicopter, Cessna, commercial airplane, and many more. The next video charts the key milestones in human aviation, start from the Fable Icarus and Daedalus, the Montgolfier and Wright brothers and the space race, all delivered in a 5-minute single take. This video owns by History Bombs.
History Bombs pilot episode action.
Yo, narrator man, what's up?
Wilbur Wright, what are you doing?
Well, this is my gig, man. History of aviation.
Yes, we don't get to you for 2 minutes and 50 seconds. Now get lost.
Whatever, man. Jeez. Why are the British so uptight?
It's time for the history bomb of aviation. And our journey begins in ancient Greece. Icarus and Daedalus took to the skies, tragically flew just a little too high. Waxy wings got melty like a candle. The sun proved too hard to handle. So before you make wings, don't be a hero. Keep the wax for your legs and the feathers in a pillow. Wise words there. So, not the most promising start for human aviation, but bizarrely, this mythical mishap inspired the first pioneers of flight. Let's meet one of them now. The year is 1010. An English monk has a similar plan. Homemade wings, jumps off an abbey, flew 200 meters and got a bit flappy. Crash landed and broke his limb. Should have stuck to praying and singing hymns. Ah yes, silly monk. And that set the tone for the next few hundred years of human aviation. Not so much flying, but assisted falling. The first person to think logically about human flight was this chap.
Welcome to Florence, lovely to meet ya. I'm in the middle of the Mona Lisa, but when I'm not painting, I like to sketch drafts for parachutes, gliders, and autographs. I didn't have the time to make them, I'm far too busy. Arrivederci, Leonardo da Vinci.
Arrivederci, indeed. He did have some pretty good drawings, but sadly, these weren't discovered for 300 years. In the meantime, Europeans were getting very excited about hot air ballooning, and at the forefront were the Montgolfier brothers.
Bonjour, we're Montgolfiers. Gonna take you up in the air. We learned that hot air rises, sends the balloons and we want surprises. Lifted a sheep with a chicken and a duck. Most of France were like, kiss up. That's a style, that's a rush. Like a balloons, we're out of control.
Two problems with balloons. One, impossible to change direction. Two, they caught on fire. Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin solved the first problem with his dirigible airships, but they still caught on fire. Hindenburg disaster, anyone? Now, whilst the French were messing around with airships, it was naturally left to a right-minded Englishman to get on with the proper business of pioneering fixed-wing aircraft. That man was Sir George Cayley.
Silly French, I have no time for dirigibles. It's time for the fundamental principles of flight. I say, what, where? My butler flew a glider from here to there. The mechanics of flying, they are a must. Weight, lift, drag, thrust. I need a lightweight engine, but they think I'm demented.
30s and 50s, they haven't been invented.
Cayley's work ushered in the age of steam. From the 1870s, lightweight steam engines were being used for short test flights, and in the 1890s, Samuel Langley achieved an unmanned flight of 1 kilometer. At the dawn of the 20th century, manned flight was finally realized.
Hey Wilbur, let's do this right. We're gonna be the grandmasters of flight.
Oh yeah!
Got the power, free access control. Yaw, pitch and roll. We built a biplane, called it the Flyer. Launched off a catapult and got much higher. Planes were our invention, loud and clear. So quit whining about our landing gear.
Yeah.
There is still argument as to whether the Wright brothers did make the first plane because they used a catapult, not wheels, to take off. Nevertheless, their revolutionary steering mechanism changed everything. In 1908, Louis Blériot flew from France to England, and other pilots, both men and women, started taking to the skies to push forward the barriers of speed and distance. Pretty soon, however, planes were being put to a far more destructive task.
My Name ist Manfred von Richthofen. You might know me as the Red Baron. Shot down Allied planes for fun. 80 kills with just 2 machine guns.
Bonjour, je m'appelle René Fonck. #1 pilot for La France. 75 kills, I'm as good as they get. Even more deadly than a stale baguette.
Phew, thank goodness that's over with. Oh, here we go. Here's World War II. And interestingly, it wasn't just the men who were flying as pilots.
We are the Night Witches from Russia with love. We dropped 3,000 tons of bombs from above. Flying at night over enemy lines, each woman flew over 1,000 times. When you think about World War II and the brave pilots who fought for you, it wasn't just Bertie, Percy and Peter. It was Mary, Natalia, Irina and Vera.
Incredible story. Both world wars were unimaginably destructive, but through their course, human flight was revolutionized. Planes were getting faster and more ambitious, and gutsy test pilots were pushing them to the limit. After World War II, flying got sexy.
Chuck Yeager, pilot of renown. In 47, I broke the speed of sound. Elwood Crossfield, US pilot 2, took a skyrocket past Mach 2. Yuri Gagarin, Russian ace. In 61, I went to outer space. Neil Armstrong, how'd you do? In 69, I walked on the moon.
And the need for speed is still alive. In 2010, Boeing hit Mark 5, and now for space, the final frontier. Will space tourism soon appear? Whatever happens, we've come a long way from Icarus and Daedalus flapping away. Thanks for joining us for the ride. You got half a second to subscribe.